And now, let the trial begin.
In this video, we're going to look at the casting of Frank Stone, how both companies involved played their part, and also how this game is a perfect example of everything wrong with both companies. For those that don't know, The Casting of Frank Stone is a game created by Supermassive Games and BHVR Interactive, and it describes itself as a Supermassive style game in the world of Dead by Daylight. If you're a returning viewer, first of all, welcome back. Thanks for coming back for another video. And second of all, you're already probably pretty caught up on BHVR's business decisions, as I've done two very in-depth videos about BHVR's choices. One of them was more specific to Dead by Daylight, and one of them was more specific to BHVR as a company, not just BHVR Interactive, the creators of Dead by Daylight. Those two videos will help you understand BHVR's business decisions and also their intentions for the future, which is very important to know for this video. Because when you understand why a business would make certain decisions, it helps you understand the game they released way better. Or in this case, knowing the backstories of both companies involved might help you understand why things didn't go as well as they possibly could have. And just a quick disclaimer, because I didn't put one last time and a couple people absolutely lost their minds in the comments, the criticisms you hear in this video are mostly public opinion. If I throw my opinion in here, I'll make it very clear. It's not going to be like a Sunny V2 situation. This is not me mindlessly complaining about these companies, as I've played every game that both of these studios have put out. But just because you like a company or a certain game does not make it exempt from criticism. Now that the boring stuff is out of the way, let's look at both of these companies individually to better understand why the success of this game was crucial for both of them. Let's start first with the company that most of us know, and most of us moderately like. BHVR is no stranger to controversies, they are no stranger to bad business decisions, and they are also no stranger to mistreating their employees. Like I said earlier, this is going to be pretty brief because most of you guys know what BHVR's done. As we've talked about before, Project T has already ceased development, even though they promised it would be new, exciting, and innovative gameplay within the Dead by Daylight universe. Then, early playtesters revealed that the game made no effort to set itself apart from other games in the genre, which is exactly what I said was going to happen in the video I made when Project T was first announced. Playtesters called it unoriginal and uninteresting, which caused BHVR to pull all funding from it, and not only just shut down the project, they shut down the entire studio. And in case you forgot, 2023 was a giant loss for BHVR with the catastrophic failure of Meet Your Maker. Just a reminder that this is all a recap. I have a video that talks about this in more detail if you care to learn more about it. But for now, Meet Your Maker charged $30 on release for an unfinished game, but if you plan to buy the DLCs offered, you'll be cashing out $80 for a game that's struggling to even keep itself above water. I promise you with no doubt in my mind that in the next 2 years, BHVR will sunset Meet Your Maker. And unfortunately, that does mean that people will inevitably be fired for BHVR's missteps, not theirs. So we have Meet Your Maker's failure, mainly due to the greed of people working higher up in the business. We have BHVR completely forcibly shutting down an entire studio the second one project doesn't work out, and everyone lost their job. And in March of this year, BHVR fired over 100 of their employees after their most successful original chapter release to date ever. And I will bring that up as much as I can because it's a scummy thing to do. What's insane to me is some of the people that were fired in these mass layoffs were people that were directly responsible for the chapter doing so well. The person who was in charge of all of the promo for this chapter was fired directly after bringing great success to the company they work at. BHVR is scummy. The reason I talk about Meet Your Maker being such a massive failure, by the way, is because Meet Your Maker's giant failure was also the moment that BHVR realized they will see more success on their other games if they put them all in the DBD universe. And, well, that's exactly what they did. The next Dead by Daylight anniversary to follow Meet Your Maker's failure advertised multiple new games. Instead of being a Dead by Daylight event, it felt more like a Behavior interactive game reveal event. We got a shovelware game that has little to no players still playing it, and I can now confirm that when it started development, it wasn't even intended to be a DBD game, it was just going to be a knockoff roguelike. Then they made this change and they decided, what if we threw some blood points and some hooks in there, and all of a sudden it's in the DBD universe. That was a last second decision, and it didn't help the game at all. Because like I've said before, it isn't a bad idea to take all of your games and put them into the Dead by Daylight universe just to ensure that they have a higher rate of interest right out the gate. Meet Your Maker proved that consumers will not care about a behavior game just because it's a behavior game, but they will care about a behavior game if it's in the world of Dead by Daylight. But the problem is the way they went about it. Throwing some generators and some blood points into a game that was not intended for the DVD universe is a surefire way to make sure that none of your fans will ever trust another title you make again. Long story short, they took this idea of expanding the DVD universe and took it way too far, leaning more into oversaturating the DVD universe with games that are only being called unoriginal and uninteresting. Like Meet Your Maker, I would honestly say is one of their more original games. But I think the fact that a lot of people don't care about Behavior's new IPs, combined with the fact that it was way overpriced with not enough content, that game faced its own struggles. But again, when you look at the games that were announced during the Year 8 Dead by Daylight anniversary event, an event that's supposed to be focused on a roadmap for what's to come for Dead by Daylight, more insight into the characters they released in this year of Dead by Daylight, instead it was just one big fucking game expo for Behavior. But those games weren't original enough to keep players interested. The reason I'm bringing all of this up in Behavior's recap is because it's very important to know how much Behavior had riding on the casting of Frank Stone's success. They used the DVD universe as a marketing tool to try to sell lower effort, lower budget games. It didn't work, and now people don't take any of that marketing seriously. Like now it's more obvious than ever to any consumer that they're only saying that because they need more cash in their pockets, and not that the content was actually heavily inspired by the DVD universe, you know? So with Behavior showing their cards a little too fast and making it very obvious to the public that they only make DVD universe titles to make more money, and not because it's something they're passionate about or something they actually plan to make quality products for, you can now see why they had so much riding on the casting of Frank Stone. Because the casting of Frank Stone was supposedly going to be the game to fix that. A fully fleshed out new perspective on the Dead by Daylight universe with the help of Supermassive Games, a company that is known for creating choice-driven story games that also happen to be in the horror genre. This is a match made in heaven, right? Well, funny enough, these companies actually have a lot more in common than you think. Let's talk about Supermassive Games. In the same way Behavior had a lot riding on this game, so did Supermassive. For Behavior, they had a lot of failed games under their belt. They could not seem to shake the curse of only being known for Dead by Daylight, so they made the business decision to pivot all of their future games into the Dead by Daylight universe, which did not help them at all. And in the same way, Behavior had laid off over 100 employees earlier in the year without letting any of them know, as I previously mentioned. Supermassive had 350 employees, but like other companies with not so great track records, they laid off a quarter of their entire staff this last year. I assume it was necessary, but it's still a scummy thing to hear. Now, Behavior had a lot riding on this game because they're notorious for only having one good game and all the rest are just trying to recreate the success of that game, right? Let me introduce you to Until Dawn. Until Dawn is objectively Supermassive's magnum opus. It is a long playtime, it is their most successful game they've ever released, and it's also the first game in this genre they created. By the numbers, is by far Supermassive's best game. Before Until Dawn, Supermassive had explored other genres such as management and trivia. They also worked on Little Big Planet's DLC content. Unbelievably goated game, by the way. And in 2012, Supermassive even teamed up with the BBC to make a Doctor Who spin-off game, which was horribly received. It was labeled overall as shallow, a clear cash grab, and one of the main things people said was that it was super buggy, which will be important later. After the failure of the Doctor Who game, the BBC tried one more time with Supermassive, and they made a dinosaur game Hell yeah. When this Walking with Dinosaurs game released in 2013, most of the public had no idea how big of a name Supermassive Games was going to be in 2 years when Until Dawn released in 2015. Until Dawn was not only the first game of many for Supermassive Games in that format, but also it was a trendsetter for what was to come in future years. What sets this game apart is the story is immersive, the world is interesting to explore, the characters are likable, and the game runs great, which a lot of these things you unfortunately cannot say for future Supermassive titles, as we'll talk about. But one really fun fact about Until Dawn is that it was originally designed to be a PlayStation Move title. Do you guys remember the PlayStation Move? It was PlayStation's attempt at competing with the Wii at the time. Whoever made the life-saving decision to switch this title from a PlayStation Move title to a PS4 title, you saved this game. I can promise you wholeheartedly that less than half the people that love this game now would have loved it the same if it was a PlayStation Move title. It is still the game that everybody thinks of when they hear the name Supermassive Games, and they have consistently been trying to reach that level of success again. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? They even tried to recreate the success by re-releasing Until Dawn as a remake on newer gen consoles, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with remakes. I love a good remake, but I think the problem was the public was a little confused as to why it was getting a remake in the first place, because the game is not that old. And when you look at the game and you look at the remake, you'll go, why did we need this? And by the numbers, unfortunately, the Until Dawn remake was not really well received, and it did not perform nearly as highly as they were anticipating. The main thing people seemed to say online was that it was unnecessary to remake such a recent game, as many were talking about the highly anticipated Silent Hill 2 remake, which is out now, that was approaching its release date as well. And as I was making this video, a YouTuber named Master Assassin put this video out, which does a much better job than I ever could have, talking about the downsides of this remake. But what you need to know for this video is the pricing was incredibly questionable. They were charging AAA modern day prices as if it were a 2025 AAA release, when it is just taking the assets from Unreal Engine 4 into Unreal Engine 5, while also butchering the soundtrack along the way. Most of you know by now that I am unnecessarily obsessed with soundtracks in games as well as the sound design, so when that is so overlooked as it was in this remake, it upsets a lot of people. The problem with having such a high peak so early into your career is that everybody's perception of you from this point forward will be that you're going downhill. No matter how good your next game is, no matter if it's a whole new idea or another game within the same genre, people are going to have problems with it because of how good your previous game was. Now, in terms of how Behavior handled that public perception and how Supermassive handled that public perception, I do think Supermassive did a better job. After Until Dawn, they released the Dark Pictures Anthology series. The first game in the Dark Pictures series was Man of Medan, but obviously we are not about to go through each individual game with such detail, because even though it is important to understand Behavior's and Supermassive's history so we know why this game was so important for both companies, we don't need to know about every little aspect of every game they've released, you know? All you need to know about the Dark Pictures series is it's an anthology series within the same genre. Horror, choices matter, story-driven. The big differences between the Dark Pictures games and Until Dawn is that the Dark Pictures games are much shorter. Not only that, they also have significantly less depth to them, and out of the 4 that are released right now, they're not really well accepted. Now again, these criticisms do not mean the game is bad. Looking at Steam alone, these games honestly put up pretty good sales numbers. But I think the problem is that sales do not reflect the game being good. Starfield is a great example of that. That was Bethesda's highest selling game in Bethesda history, but the mass majority of fans that bought it regretted buying it. Now, as a Starfield apologist, I am more likely than anyone to give Supermassive the benefit of the doubt here, but it is important to know that a very common feedback of the Dark Pictures games is that a lot of people regret buying them. And what's pretty crazy about all of this is the criticisms are pretty much the same regardless of which title you look at. Now, can you think of another company that had a big breakout success game and then every game they released after, a lot of people were saying they regretted buying it? Slipping my mind. If you haven't caught on by now, 15 minutes into this video, everything we're talking about leads up to the casting of Frank Stone, and everything we're talking about affected the casting of Frank Stone. And this right here is probably the most important section of the video in terms of what influenced the casting of Frank Stone's not so great feedback. Now, to give Supermassive a little credit, The Quarry was Supermassive listening to their fans. The fans were getting very tired of the Dark Pictures games in succession with no major title to break them up. Their worlds were very shallow, the characters were a lot more forgettable, and the playtimes were incredibly short, especially for how much they were charging for these games. 4-hour playtime for a $30 game? And they did listen, and they released The Quarry, which is an 8 to 10 hour playtime the same way Until Dawn was. But the problem is, just because they listened to the playtime complaint doesn't mean they listened to anything else. With all the research I did for this video, the one main takeaway I got was that Supermassive fans have had the same criticisms of their games since Until Dawn. The games are always super buggy on release, super unoptimized and game-breaking bugs on release. The characters are a big gamble, which means one game, the characters might be likable and enjoyable, and the next game, you might hate everybody. And one of the more modern and loudest criticisms is that there has not been a game from Supermassive since that has had the depth that Until Dawn has had, which I fully agree with. So even though you could argue that The Quarry was Supermassive listening to their fans, by giving them a longer playtime from the anthology games, all of the other issues that come with Supermassive games were still there. The characters are always a gamble, whether they're either going to be forgettable or unlikable. The game is always unoptimized on release. It's kind of impressive, to the point where it will just crash your system the second you try to play it. And if the story isn't loaded with plot holes and inconsistencies that make it make no sense, it's often incredibly uninteresting, which is how Supermassive got this label of being a gamble. One funny thing I read about Supermassive was the best way you can describe them is you're either going to play one of the best or worst story games of your life. And you could argue that comes down to the preference of the player, but I would disagree. Supermassive is very, very good at completely missing the plot, both figuratively and literally, in their own stories. So if Supermassive has consistently not listened to criticisms that date all the way back to the release of Until Dawn, what has Behavior done? I don't even want to talk about Behavior, dude. Listen, all due respect, I'm having fun making this video. Talking about Behavior gets old. Like I've said already, if you've seen any of my other videos in this little series I've done, you know how awful they are. I don't need to dive into it for the 100th time, so I'll just leave this with one example instead of dedicating 20 minutes to it. The entire DVD community, has been asking for a 3-month break, one skipped chapter, for a Project Health, where they can figure out the dog shit code in their game. For people that don't know, Behavior has already made it clear in their Q&A forums that they don't know how to fix their game's code. Because of them not expecting the game to be as big as it was, the code at its very core is very flawed. And instead of trying to maybe passively work towards a higher quality game, they've decided, oh, bummer. Our game's just gonna break every time we add something new or slightly adjust something. And why don't they view Project Health as a priority when your game is objectively extremely buggy all the time? Because it doesn't make them a direct profit. The entire community has been saying time and time again, Behavior, you've given us the content, slow it down and give us some fixes so the content is actually playable. And not only do they never plan to do it, they ignore everyone that makes that request. And if you can't directly profit off of directing all your manpower to a Project Health and actually fixing your game, you'll instead dump out another killer that is completely unfinished on release. Unfinished to a whole new degree, honestly. It makes Knight and Twins look like perfect killers. Like I've said 100 times, this is not the workers' fault at Behavior. This is the higher-ups' fault at Behavior. Now, before we progress any farther, I want you to stop and give yourself a pat on the back. You know why? Because your attention span is clearly not destroyed by TikTok. You just sat through 20 minutes of backstory so I can properly explain what happened with the casting of Frank Stone. And honestly, if you're still watching this far into the video, I appreciate it and thank you. But it's all gonna pay off now. It's time we talk about From the start of the video till now, we've talked about a ton of things that might have seemed disconnected or unnecessary to the video. but every single thing we've talked about now comes into play. The biggest similarity, or the biggest weakness that both of these companies has, no question, is that they are buggy. They are unoptimized, they are game-breaking, and they always take weeks after release to get the game into a playable state. Again, for Supermassive, that would be actual games, and for DBD, that would be new chapters. If you are a fan of either and follow what either of them do, then you know this to be true. Now, a lot of this can be excused as different hardware will cause different bugs, but that's not these companies' case. They like to use that as an excuse, but that doesn't excuse the way these companies work. Because unanimously, across the board, the casting of Frank Stone was a horrible release. It is without question the worst release day of either of these two companies' careers. Why? Because both of these companies heavily advertised the pre-order and incentivized people to purchase the game early. They also obviously had the deluxe edition in which these customers pay more. So obviously these customers are very excited. They are waiting, counting down the minutes for this game to come out. And that's fair. You've invested money into something. You want to be there when it's available. You know, you want to be first in line to support these companies. Until the casting of Frank Stone's release day, when they released the wrong file. Yes, that is not a joke. They shipped the wrong file. The casting of Frank Stone, on its release day, as a product, was a 0-byte file that cost AAA prices. But listen, that's only first impressions, right? Both of these companies are very notorious for buggy, unoptimized, game-breaking releases, so as long as they didn't do that, honestly, shipping a 0-byte file as your final product, you can look past that as long as the game runs well. Did the game run well? Well, considering this was one of the most viewed tweets from the casting of Frank Stone's release day, it's a pretty good representation of how the entire release month went down for the casting of Frank Stone. And even though I know these two companies, and I know they're not reliable on release, and I know to never pre-order a game because you don't actually know what you're pre-ordering, I pre-ordered the deluxe edition, specifically so I could stream it right when it came out. So then, I try to stream a 0-byte file, and then when the game finally does come out, I couldn't stream it because it crashed my PC twice. And you might think it's my hardware, but I have a 3070, this graphics card should most definitely be able to handle this game, and at the very least, it should be able to boot the game and get to the menu without it crashing. Not to mention, there was an issue where you couldn't change your quality settings on release, which is what most people were talking about under most discussion threads I was looking at. I really want to play the game, and it seems interesting, but I can't lower my settings because they don't save. And I can't play the game on Ultra because it crashes. So, naturally, as we'd expect from Supermassive in behavior, a buggy, unoptimized, game-breaking mess of a release. And in my opinion, the messiest release of either of these studios' history. Although, Houndmaster... she didn't work either. Think about it. In all seriousness, though, this is right on the money for what you should expect from Supermassive in behavior. And it's far from the only thing. And all of these things only cement the point that I made at the start, that this game does a really good job highlighting the worst aspects of Behavior Interactive and the worst aspects of Supermassive games. The next thing I would say is the story. I purposefully repeated time and time again throughout this video that it's always a gamble with these companies. The story could either be very intriguing and one of your favorites, the characters could be likable, and the lore could be interesting, or the world could be shallow, the characters could either be uninteresting or unlikable to the point where you'd just rather have them die in the story, and the story is either massively uninteresting or it's just a means to an end, meaning that it's kind of sloppily thrown together, but the ending has a big impact. So as long as the player doesn't look too close into any of the story's details, then it would be enjoyable. But it's probably loaded with plot holes. And as we've said, this game is a great summary of everything wrong with both companies, so obviously that's the case in this game too. There is such a divide online about the feedback of this story. And so when it's right down the middle like this is like the only time I feel like my personal opinion does matter. I could sit here and regurgitate all the people saying, I really liked it, I liked all the fan service, I liked all the DVD tie-ins, and then I could read the other half that says, well, are they DVD tie-ins, or do they just throw in DVD characters mindlessly to get you to point at it and go, oh my god, that's the guy from DVD? And unfortunately, I do side with the people that say the tie-ins were pretty shallow. And especially in a game that's designed to be played multiple times, like to the degree of The Quarry and Until Dawn, not like a Dark Pictures game, it's not there. Now again, this is opinion. You are welcome to believe it is there. But from my side of things, I don't think the majority of this game puts any effort into actually expanding the world of Dead by Daylight, which was the entire purpose of this game, keep in mind. Not only was that this game's purpose, this was the final attempt from Behavior Interactive to properly expand the Dead by Daylight universe after they horribly oversaturated it with low-quality titles. And those titles were only ever considered to be in the DVD universe as a last-second marketing decision to try to sell more units, not because they wanted it to be. So then when you look at this project that Behavior promised will do a better job at it, you go, okay, yeah, that's Hillbilly from DVD. He's a statue. Cool. Oh my god, that's Dredge from DVD in a magazine. How cool is that? What's the extra lore? Oh, nope, it's just a restatement of his lore in DVD. Okay, and that's my main point here. I don't think it expands upon the DVD universe. I think it repeats the DVD universe in a different format, which, by the way, is not expanding. Now, I can't lie. When I first played the game, I absolutely was pointing and saying, that's the thing from DVD. Oh my god, look at that. And I had a blast. But this game should still be enjoyable to people that don't have 2,100 hours in Dead by Daylight. And I don't think it is at all. Now, if you think that's not a fair point to bring up, keep in mind Supermassive and Behavior alike said that this game was going to be for everybody. Die-hard DVD fans, casual DVD fans, and people that don't play DVD that want a good horror story game. And that, I think, is a complete lie. Just a full lie. This game was 100% made for DVD players, and not just DVD players, die-hard DVD fans. And I think that's the only audience it satisfies. The casting of Frank Stone's reviews are a lawless land because of the amount of people that have never played DVD that love Supermassive, and were like, oh, Supermassive made a new game, let's try it out. Man, they are pissed. Now guys, keep in mind, this reviewer is not at fault. They were looking for a Supermassive title. And this game is supposedly going to be fun for anybody, right? So here is the perspective of someone that doesn't play DVD, but plays a Supermassive game. How did the game hold up on its own without the fan service? 1 star. This game was nothing but a huge disappointment. My friends and I all played the Dark Pictures Anthology as well as The Quarry, and were stoked to sit down and play this one, but it absolutely sucked. Here's why. It's boring, lacks suspense or any sort of captivating conflict. The majority of the game is slow, uninteresting dialogue, and shitty repetitive gameplay. For example, there's a mechanic where you can use a film camera as a weapon, and all you do is hold right trigger while staring at the screen. This is used numerous times. Number 2, it's two-dimensional. There are like 3 mechanics in this game. Fixing generators, which we all know too well, using film camera as a weapon, and a predictable QuickTime mechanic that hardly has any impact on what happens in the game at all. The story's concept was mildly interesting with the interdimensionality aspect and the connection between timelines, but it just fell flat because nobody cares if the concept is okay if the game itself is shit. And number 3, it's not scary at all. No jump scares, no running away, no quick times where you're screwed if you mess up, nothing. Just stupid-ass Frank Stone made from green particles. Dude, this is so real. You would think I wrote this. I agree with all of this. Also, there's this stupid box that's literally in every scene that contains useless metal pieces that you kind of find along the way. This became me. Guys, keep in mind, remember, for DVD players, that was the box was all of the eerie add-ons from different killers, right? You guys remember that? But you need to remember, this game was advertised for anybody. This person doesn't know what the fuck an eerie add-on is, and they paid good money for this game. They are just as deserving as anyone else to enjoy the game. But it's just fan service. Now, to be fair, he did say that this was him and his friends' favorite aspect of the game, and we would cheer every time somebody opened it because there was nothing else interesting or good about this stinking garbage pile of wasted time and code. Do not purchase this game, wait for the next one. 10 out of 10 anonymous reviewer, I love it. Now keep in mind, I don't despise the casting of Frank Stone, and we're about to talk about what I think was the best part about it. But if you're like me and you lived through this release and you played the game and you felt your own feelings about it, is this not right on the money? Look at this from their perspective. They clearly love Supermassive, and they love horror story games where your choices matter. So they bought this game to find a lack of horror and a lack of story. This is where the means to an end thing comes in that I was talking about earlier. Amidst all the fan service and the conflict of the early acts of the game, It's really just all to get to the finale. And remember what I said earlier, when a game does something like that, there are so many unexplained or unexplored aspects of the story. Now, I could keep going from right here and keep giving criticisms with proof to show that Supermassive and Behavior, when you really boil down their companies, they're two companies that are really fighting to have a successful title. They both have something to prove. They're both coming off not so successful title releases, and they both made big promises with this game. Behavior promised this expansive universe, and we got generators, skill checks, and add-on trinkets, and obviously the finale as well, which we'll talk about in a second. And Supermassive promised a more expansive world as one of their more major titles, such as The Quarry and Until Dawn, which I personally do not believe they hit at all. Not to mention they promised a great story and immersiveness when, as that reviewer made very clear, there's about 3 mechanics total. They promised the horror they're known for and the story with it, when there's a severe lack of horror to the point of the game being quite boring, and the story itself, when deconstructed, makes no fucking sense. And what does make sense of it, it's honestly not interesting enough to care about, even from someone that loves Dead by Daylight. Except the final act. By far the strongest point of this game. Now, let's take a break from the criticism to highlight the strongest point of the casting of Frank Stone.
Wait, it's almost here. We have to run.
Wait.
Isn't it coming after us?
Everyone's arrived. Now we can begin.
I don't want to go home.
This is all there is.
Whether killing or surviving, the entity will play with our souls for all eternity. An endless hunt of fear and hope, pain and sacrifice, from which even death is no escape. And now, let the trial begin.
Now hold on. That's pretty good, right? Gives us a new perspective on what it's like to enter the fog. It gives a better perspective on what it feels like to be there. We see an original survivor sitting around the fire with them, and they even say Dead by Daylight's literal catchphrase, "Death is not an escape." But to me, the highest of the highs in this game, and maybe I'm biased, is the music during the chase. If you have headphones near, put them in for this part. I promise you it's worth it. This is up there with some of my favorite chase themes in all of Dead by Daylight. And it just happens to be in a spin-off story game that the majority of the public didn't even like. And although the actual chase scene itself is incredibly boring and comes down to skill checks, damn, the music is good. Now, obviously, the actual chase, well, that was it. That was the whole thing. So again, this game isn't great, and I never once said it was, but okay, you gotta admit the music goes hard. Give me that. Give me that one thing. And honestly, another thing that goes incredibly hard is Frank Stone's design. I think his story is interesting enough, but it's very strung along in this game to the point where you lose interest in it halfway through. I did a little extra research for this part, and of all the opinions I could find, nearly everyone could unanimously agree that chapter 1 through 5 is a complete bore. Yes, they are introductions, and introductions are naturally more boring, but I don't think you get it unless you've played it. It's worse than that. But I do think there is a good story here somewhere. Do I think it was well told? Well enough. Do I think it did Frank Stone justice? Absolutely not. Like that 1-star review we read earlier said, he kind of gets lost in the game mechanics a little bit, and since the game mechanics get so repetitive, so does he. The best way I could put it is there's just not a lot of breathing room for Frank Stone to be intimidating in this game. I think for a game called Whoa. I think for a game that's called The Casting of Frank Stone, they gruesomely undersold Frank Stone. And that takes us to my final point and the most important point and the whole reason I made this video, and we're fucking 35 minutes in and this is killing me. I've been working on this video for 3 weeks. The missed potential of the casting of Frank Stone is Frank Stone. His story on paper is interesting, but in this game, it's fine. Augustine's tie-in to all of this is interesting, but in this game, it's fine. The characters in this game suffer greatly from the supermassive gamble theory. Half of them are unlikable, and half of them are forgettable. But they could have saved all of this by following up on their finale. The finale is them at that campfire, and Frank Stone is watching over them, and there's 4 people at the fire, and then aged Ellen DeGeneres says, "We can finally begin." And then supposedly a trial starts. There's even the sound effect for a trial starting as the last thing you hear in the game. This entire game, from start to finish, leads up to you, the main character, or main characters, depending on how many live, in a trial against Frank Stone. The last thing you hear in this game is the trial starting sound effect that you hear in DBD before you load into a game. So you put all this money into this. You put the money into the marketing for this game. You said it was going to be great for everybody, but it's really going to hit for DBD players. Did it? They could have done 2 things here to make this game way more worthwhile. One, they could have potentially extended the story. Give a different perspective on surviving a trial in Dead by Daylight. What would these people talk about amidst their first trial in the fog? What would their thoughts be? How would they feel? What emotions would be coursing through their veins the entire time? Because think about it. If someone played this game and had never played DBD, and then they got to experience a trial after all the backstory leading up to it, that would be incredible, and that would be a great first exposure to Dead by Daylight. And then for chronically online people like me that have way too many hours in Dead by Daylight and know everything about the game, it would be an awesome new breath of fresh air, a new take on those trials you've done thousands of times before. It would have been a win-win, and it wouldn't have made this game feel so boring all the way through, because there would have been real action, real horror, real adrenaline at the end of this game. And then the other option, which most people already know what I'm going to say, is put Frank Stone in DBD. These 2 dev studios spent all that time, effort, and money on making this game and creating Frank Stone's backstory, and they went completely dark directly after. They started advertising other games, and they haven't said a single word about Frank Stone since the day this game released. Not even for promotion. But where did Frank Stone go? What was the point of building up Frank Stone's entire origin story if we don't get to experience anything further from it? This game plays like a prequel to Dead by Daylight. But then they don't put the main character of this story in Dead by Daylight. And you know what the weirdest thing is about this? A massive portion of the casting of Frank Stone was leaked in a Discord server before the game came out. They got the plot correct, they got the final twist correct, they got all the characters right. But the one thing they got wrong was they said that Frank Stone was already confirmed to be the next original killer to be added to Dead by Daylight, which makes perfect sense. And then when that original chapter comes along, it's the Houndmaster. And for people that don't know, the Houndmaster had leaked 8 months before, and we never heard another thing about her. Now, to give Behavior and Supermassive the benefit of the doubt, maybe there's some licensing stuff that has to be dealt with first. Also, Houndmaster leaked first and released first, so maybe Frank Stone still has a chance to be added. But realistically, if they planned on adding Frank Stone, they probably would have done it with the release of the game, right? And if not at the exact same time, at least the next original chapter to follow the release of it. But Behavior themselves pretends that Frank Stone doesn't even exist now. Like I said earlier, they haven't said anything about Frank Stone since the day of his release. This character that they were supposedly so passionate about, they stopped talking about the second they were contractually allowed to. No updates, no promotions, no behind the scenes. For 4 months? Especially when you are potentially releasing a chapter with this character? And let's say that the leaks were completely fake and they just got really lucky. That doesn't make any more sense either. There were 2 outcomes here. Either Behavior had a Frank Stone chapter planned, and either it got delayed, or there were licensing issues since technically Supermassive and Behavior both own the rights to Frank Stone, and that could have turned into something messy. Or the leaks weren't true, and Behavior just never thought to add Frank Stone to Dead by Daylight. And if that's the case, then this game is 10 times worse. than it is if they intended to add Frank Stone. Like I said, this whole game plays like a prequel. You cannot have a prequel without an original. This game stops right where the action starts. And if they fully planned for that to be the end of Frank Stone's story, then this game is awful. But on the other side of things, if the casting of Frank Stone ends up being a chapter later on in DVD, then this game is awesome. What a cool way to learn more about a killer in Dead by Daylight than just going to the killer tab and reading their lore. And I understand what they were going for. They expected the player to play this game, get to the end and go, oh my god, a trial would have started right there. That's so cool. But instead, the player plays this game and goes, wait, that's it? Remember how I made a big point at the 20-minute mark of this video that you were sitting through a whole lot of backstory? That wasn't for no reason. If I would have stopped the video right there, that's what playing the casting of Frank Stone feels like. Why did you, Supermassive and BHVR, build up the player all the way up to the most interesting climax possible to end the game there? That would have only worked and been a satisfying ending if you could play the trial, whether it's in the casting of Frank Stone you play the trial, or Frank Stone is added to Dead by Daylight. But instead, right when the best moment of the game should have hit, we got a black screen and the credits rolled.